Spring has sprung in the great state of Iowa, and if you've been thinking about getting outdoors with your family during the best time of year, we want to help you here at Plaza RV. We are a locally owned RV dealer in Bondurant who cares about our customers before, during, and most importantly, after your purchase. Give us a chance. We will treat you like family. Buy local. Buy from Plaza RV.
Eric Church Free the Machine Tour. Live at Wells Fargo Arena, Saturday, September 27th. One epic night of music that you won't want to miss with special guest Marcus King Band. Get tickets now at highvtix.com. His new album, Evangeline vs. the Machine, is out now. For more, visit ericchurch.com. Scott Dochterman, Chad Leistikow, together on one pod, talking odds and all things Big Ten. Powered by GameDay Men's Health, with locations in Ankeny, West Des Moines, and North Liberty. From the Channel Seed Studios, this is Legends and Listeners, exclusively on Iowa Everywhere.
Hey, Hawkeye fans, Big Ten fans, and Iowans everywhere. Glad to have you here for episode 93 of Legends and Listeners, as always, coming to you from the Channel Seed Studios. Chad Leistikow here of the Des Moines Register, Scott Dochterman of The Athletic. We're thankful that Iowa Everywhere allows us to team up with you guys and gals once a week. And as always, we are presented by GameDay Men's Health. Scott, special show today. One, we're not going to be held hostage by the news cycle. Iowa baseball has a big series coming up this week against Oregon, but that kind of signals that we're near the end of the academic and school year, which gives us a good chance now to kind of review, I guess, Iowa athletics in now 2 school years of the Beth Goetz era under her leadership. We both felt this was a good time to step back and kind of take stock of what Beth has accomplished so far, maybe how she's been received, some of her top moves, and maybe what we'd like to see from her in athletics going forward. And certainly a lot is on the horizon too for Iowa's athletic director. So I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, good to talk to you today, Chad. I think this is a really kind of an interesting podcast. We used to call these the horse latitudes, you know, the times when you just kind of start to look at other topics besides what's right in front of you. But I think this is really topical in that we are, it's been an impactful year and a half plus that Beth Goetz has really kind of taken reins of the athletic department. And I think it's really an important time to kind of step back, look at what she's done, you know, maybe look at the pluses, if there are any minuses, and then also looking forward. But, you know, before we start, you know, I did want to kind of give some background here about her and what led her to the point where she is at Iowa, and then start discussing some of the more impactful moments of her reign thus far. And one is she's from St. Louis. She was a college soccer player, and she was a member of the very first Clemson soccer team. So she started out in a junior college and then went to Clemson on a scholarship. The first season that Clemson had soccer, played there. Then she returned to her hometown as an assistant women's soccer coach, and then quickly moved up to head soccer coach. Started, you know, and she had to do it all at what's called UMSL, the University of Missouri at St. Louis. Had to do it all there, you know, and that was mow the fields and watch over academics and all of that. She also moved up in those reigns as kind of an assistant athletic director there and juggling a lot of balls and, you know, not just on the soccer field. And then made a real pivotal decision in 2008, which was, do you want to continue to be a coach or do you want to go on to administration? And so she ended up moving on to Butler for the better part of 6 years as the associate AD and senior women's administrator. That's where she met Brad Stevens, who's kind of been an impactful person in her career and just knowing him. And then she became the deputy at Minnesota And that was a really important time when she got bumped up to interim AD, because Norwood Teague was the athletic director at Minnesota and was involved in some significant, not that it isn't minor, but significant sexual harassment of people inside the athletics department, reporters, and she became the interim there. And so she also had to figure out what to do with the Jerry Kill situation. He was he retired while she was the interim, and so she became had to figure out what was next. She hired Tracy Clays full time, and then but that was also as the interim, so she didn't have a lot of options there. They decided Minnesota, she was number 2 for that job. They hired Mark Coyle from Syracuse, who's a Minnesota native. They kind of wanted a little more stability, they thought there. I think some people there would have liked to have had Beth, but and then she moved on to UConn, where she was the COO and the senior women's administrator. So she worked closely with Gino Auriemma in that program. At the same time, she was a member of the NCAA competition oversight committee. Then she became the athletic director at Ball State for 4+ years, turned into chair of the NCAA women's basketball committee while she was doing that. In Division I Nike Executive of the Year in the FBS. So she had a lot of credentials, but her goal was to get to Division I. Wisconsin, it was a kind of a closed / open search.
Power 5, yeah.
Power 5, I'm sorry. Yeah, what did I say?
Division I. Yeah.
Division I. Okay, I apologize. Yeah, Power 5. There's a big difference. And then she, at Wisconsin, she was the number 2 there when they hired Chris McIntosh. That was Barry Alvarez's hand-picked successor. It was going to be hard to win that job, but I have talked to people there that feel like maybe there was a wrong decision made in that search. So she came to Iowa to be the backup quarterback for Gary Barta, and then became interim AD when Gary Barta stepped down after a significant amount of time there. 17 years as athletic director, and then of course after a long search, went from being interim to full-time AD. So I can say this, Chad, and that is that out of all the athletic directors Iowa's had, and really the history is very short when it comes to athletic directors because they've had a long history. Gary was there 17 years. Bob Bowlesby was there 15. Bump Elliott 20. Christine Grant was 27, I think. And even going back further, Forrest Evashevsky was in charge for close to 10 years. That she was the most qualified candidate to ever take over as athletic director, because Bob Bowlesby was the AD at Northern Iowa. Ball State is an FBS program. Gary was at Wyoming, but he was only an AD for 1 year. And so she has more experience at Power 5 and and then of course as an AD. And then Bump Elliott had 1 year of an administrative experience when coming from the coaching ranks when he stepped aside for Bo Schembechler, and Christine Grant, kind of a different, era altogether. So people were questioning whether she was qualified or not, Chad. She was absolutely qualified for that job. No question. She was the most qualified person for that job. And in talking to a few people around the Big Ten, they were like, Beth's going to get that job, right? All along. And I even had a couple people very interested that, wanted the Iowa job that contacted me. What do you think? And they're like, I imagine Beth gets it, but I'm not, no pun intended, but I do think, but it was very sought after.
Yeah. Was there a runner up at all? I don't remember. Not really. It was kind of a slam dunk. Okay.
Yeah. I know they talked to several people, but it never really materialized.
It took 6 months. She was the interim for almost 6 months or 4 or 5 months, 5.5. Anyway, good breakdown there. I think that's important just to give a little background. It's not like she came out of nowhere. Got a wealth of experience. One of the ways we wanted to kind of dig into her tenure, her 2-year, 1.5-year tenure as AD, I think we'll count the interim thing. I mean, basically,
Yeah,
she was.
right.
I mean, we have. I mean, so that was August 2nd, 2023, when she officially took over for the departed Gary Barta. And so I thought a fun way to do it might be just some categories. So we kind of went over a little bit of this ahead of time, just so it had a little bit of structure. And I think let's just start with Beth's first big move as in that hot seat. And I don't think there's any question that it was a big one. Late October of 2023, the Brian Ferentz tenure at Iowa as offensive coordinator had become a national laughingstock. I mean, truly, it was panned by. The Ohio State columnist, the year before, absolutely obliterated Iowa, and Brian kept that job for the next year. And so it had just become a running joke every time Iowa performed poorly on offense, which was most weeks, let's be honest, in 2023. So, she doesn't get full credit, I guess, for that move, if you want to assign credit, but the university, with her delivering the news, informs Kirk Ferentz, I guess you could say, and Brian Ferentz, that Brian would not be retained beyond the season. So that was her first big move, Scott. How did you feel like she handled that?
I think she handled it the best possible way. It was not, this was not an easy decision. This is not that she's had easy ones, and we'll go over some of the other ones that were really important too, but you are really threading a needle here. You are the interim AD. Now, this was above her head, and Kirk had even referenced, that there was, there was a chain of command issue. And when you're starting to look at more than just Beth, it's not just, an interim AD isn't going to take out the Hall of Fame coach's kid, on her own. She'd have to be the AD because you have to have that kind of equity to do that. Well, this was made above her head. This was, Barbara Wilson. And as you said, Iowa was a laughing stock. I had to deal with it every single day where I was at the Athletic. And at times it got really old and it got tough, because it's not like we can write every day, and fans were just, vicious, and understandably, but it made our lives hell because, people wanted us to almost write one story and one story alone. Brian sucks, get rid of him. But it was an embarrassment. We're talking about the drive for 325. It was an eyesore. And when you got the whole stands chanting, "Fire Brian," at Kinnick Stadium, and then, the end was the Minnesota game. Cooper DeJean could have saved the day, but it wasn't going to save what happened on the field. It was a disaster for that offense, and it showed there was no direction. Something needed to change. And one thing I remember once I got back from talking to the officials that day and got into the
you were the pool guy. That's right.
Yeah, I was the pool boy. But after I got to the Iowa side of things, she was kind of standing up against the wall, but she was overhearing a lot of conversations. And I know the conversations among us reporters were, how can you play like this? It was just a disaster. And then we find out, a little over a week later that she made that announcement. She had to make the announcement. She was basically handed the gun, and say, fire the bullet. Mm-hmm. And I'd heard that it didn't go over too well, with whether it was Brian.
Well, that's the thing. It's that's kind of what I wanted to outline, because that's, as a first big move, you're dealing with the legendary head football coach's, firstborn child. So it's not exactly a tame start for her tenure.
Yeah.
That could have blown up in her face. I'm not saying, like you said, it was handled as a institution, so it wasn't all on her shoulders. But Kirk was frosty for a little while, even in the media.
Yeah, it was funny. I don't know, a little bit ago, I can't remember what story I was working on, but I wanted to see, okay, what did the players talk about that week? Because they were getting ready to go to play Northwestern in Chicago. And I'm like, I can't find any quotes, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, duh, Kirk shut it all down because of after the Brian stuff. And he said, I'm the only one that's going to talk this week. And yeah, he was very frosty, and the rest of the year was that way. But, when we look at it big picture, that's on Kirk. That's on Brian. I mean, Kirk, whether he had a blind spot, I think so, to his own son. And Brian, I hate to say it, was awfully selfish. I mean, to go through that and put your father through that and put your program through that, I think, he probably should have done something differently. Something had to happen. And Gary Barta didn't do it. He tried to kick the can down the road, and it made it worse, in my opinion, trying to put the 325 in there. He could have just not put that in there. He could have just said, we're going to, because then it just added to the level of laughter nationally.
Yeah, especially when you fall off the pace so quick,
Yeah.
And there's no way you're going to get there.
Right. And so Beth got put in an unenviable situation, but I think, and Kirk deserves credit for this too, it never became a combative situation ultimately between those two. Obviously, Kirk was pissed. No question, he was pissed off. And he was angry for a long time, but he eventually moved on past it. And I think Beth deserves a lot of credit for that, because it could have been something where it's lingering. As the AD, you could have had a big fallout with your most important coach.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, we remember the following week, or at Northwestern, Brian didn't wear Iowa stuff, and that was a big story. And
yeah, he did. He didn't do that until the bowl game, if I remember right.
Yeah, right. I don't remember where. I feel like, I don't know. It's foggy to me. That's unimportant to this conversation.
Yeah, right.
But it just kind of shows that there was like some bitterness there, obviously. And so, but you don't see that now. I mean, at least I don't see that now. So whatever happened there was smooth over, and obviously it led to Tim Lester, which seems to have rejuvenated Ferentz as a, and his offense and his program. I mean, Ferentz really seems to like Lester. He's turned over. I mean, a long criticism of him, fair or not, is, this was Kirk's offense. This is Kirk's offense. Well, this is not Kirk's offense anymore. He doesn't even know really how it's run, to be honest. I mean, it's the Shanahan offense. It's Lester's offense. And yes, Kirk is now but from what I understand, Lester was really in charge of hiring Omar Young, and he's been in charge of. Now Kirk has his, he has final say, of course, but this is his offense. These are his quarterbacks he's bringing in. This is an overhauled change, and it all stemmed from the move that happened in late October 2023. So a very impactful first move, Scott, for Beth Goetz, and ultimately she gets the full-time job a couple months later, I don't know, permanent. Do you call it permanent full-time? I guess it's not permanent. It's not like the Pope, a lifetime appointment or anything.
Yeah.
But certainly that did not. It seemed. Well, here's what I'll say. It seemed to, and I know she doesn't get all the credit for it, but it just seemed to take a huge weight off the whole shoulders of the fan base, of honestly Iowa athletics. It just, you knew what the move was going to be, and you kind of took it out of Kirk's hands. In a way, if Kirk looks back at it, maybe I don't know, I wonder if he'll ever be appreciative of it in some ways, that he didn't have to pull the trigger in some, you know what I mean? Or whatever. Because ultimately it was the right thing, and it was a good thing for everybody. I mean, Brian's got his own job now, like Kirk's doing fine. Kirk is now, lost Doyle and his son, over the last 5 years, two of his closest coaching companions, and he's moved on. He's that's the way he operates. So I think ultimately, hopefully he sees it as a kind of a blessing, I guess.
Oh, you're right. If he had to come to the end of that season, and Brian still wasn't in that position, first of all, it was toxic, and it was difficult for everybody. It was difficult for the other coaches. It was difficult for the players to deal with that. The lack of any kind of offense was just, you couldn't. and not only were they a laughing stock, but I think, when we talk about this with basketball, and we'll get into this in a little bit, but you've got to sell hope. There was no hope that Iowa was going to do anything different on offense at that point. It was like they're going to do the same thing. They got the same people. It's Kirk's offense. It's never going to change. It's going to be this way forever. And he's never going to fire Brian. It's his kid. And it's just this. And I think it reached a point. Obviously, the critical mass had tipped against him, Brian. But then also it reached a point where I think that had he continued in that position, without seeing the end of the road, that I think the fans would have turned on the program. I think they would have said, you know what, we're not going to do this until there's change. And then ultimately for Brian, I think it worked because they did win the division. He did get some flowers. People weren't booing him anymore. It's kind of like, okay, we understand. It's time, now you can kind of, I don't know, not celebrate him, but not, all right, we appreciate you for what, being a former Iowa player. And I think we remember the end of the Illinois game when Caleb Johnson, his run, and everybody, they threw Gatorade on him and, celebrated him on the field. I mean, I thought that was really a big deal for him.
Brian. I mean,
yeah.
For the most part, the players like Brian.
Yeah. And so therefore he was able to get out with at least a little bit of a celebration, or it feels good about it. I don't know what the relationship's like so much with him and his dad right now. I know that they've had some frosty moments, I think, in part because of this, but then, ultimately though, it's, I think if you were to give her a grade for how she handled that in the moment, post Kirk or post Brian, you've got to give her an A, because she managed it to the point where it never felt like, there was some bitterness, but there wasn't so much of it didn't hinder the program or their relationship. So, and you got a right guy in charge, so, and you didn't lose any of your staff really, other than those like Liddell Betts eventually, went to the NFL.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, moving on to a lot has happened since. We'll get to all this stuff. We're going to circle around to it, I promise, and it's all part of this review. But let's go to a new category here, Scott. Beth Goetz's most impactful move. I'll turn it over to you to see what you think in her basically 2 years.
I think this one, Brian was, it was high profile, but he was an assistant coach. The decision wasn't solely hers. The decision that was solely hers and is as difficult of a situation as an Iowa AD has faced in a long, long time was her decision to let go of Fran McCaffery. We know, Fran was the all-time winningest coach in Iowa history. He's had ranked teams, top 10 teams, through the course of the year at times, won some tournament games. But we also saw what it had become, which was a very stale situation. And the fans didn't show up. Average less than 5,000 butts in the seats his last year. Fran, it wasn't all. Fran tried to make it all about the floor, but when he made it all about the floor, the fans didn't show up. And again, I had conversations about stuff and just on the side with some Big Ten ADs on this. And their general consensus was, and this was like going back a couple months before it was like, I do not envy her in this situation. Iowa needs more than this, but Fran is a good coach and he's done a lot for that program. So it's this really difficult situation. So I think that was as impactful, or that next to the next one, big one coming up that we know will come. Maybe it's in 10 years, maybe it's 2 years, but there's really very few situations that'll be as big as the one she faced. How do you think she handled it, Chad?
Yeah, I thought she handled it really well, because Iowa loses in the Big Ten tournament to Illinois. Second game they won. There was a little bit of a late. You wonder when she kind of came to the decision. I don't know if we'll ever know. I have to believe, based on just the swiftness of what happened, that it was probably in the works for quite a while. I think I don't know if it was months or weeks, but certainly weeks, I would say.
Yeah.
But you know, it happened less than 24 hours after Iowa loses in the Big Ten tournament, after Fran McCaffery is ejected from that game. And, you know, she waited for the travel parties to get back and kind of made the move on a Friday. I mean, it needed to be done quickly if it was, because you got to start moving. And so I thought that she did handle it very well. I don't know. And I think it was definitely, it was the right move. It was a difficult choice, but it was something that had to be done. And I know that behind the scenes for a while, she would have had to also be going through the finances of it all. You know, hey, what's it going to cost us to, obviously that's easy to figure out. What's it going to cost us to get rid of Fran McCaffery? $4.2 million. But what's it going to cost us to get a new coach? What is the cost of keeping Fran and figuring out those costs? You know, what kind of deterioration in this program? I don't know if she got to the point of like, what players are we going to lose either way? I think they probably lose at least Owen Freeman either way. You know, who knows about the others, and that doesn't really matter at this point. But certainly NIL was a major issue, and Fran deserves to point to that in some ways, but also I think some of it, you know, you can definitely pin on his shoulders too for not being, you know, an equal, you know, a full partner in the whole deal. So it was all complicated, but I think the way she handled it was professionally, swiftly. You know, it is a business, Scott, and I think she handled it like a professional and moved on and made, you know, did the right thing. Wasn't deterred by the cost of it, because there is an initial cost, and they're, you know, they're facing a lot of financial challenges right now. And so I thought she handled it well. And so it was done on a Friday, and I think it was, it felt like, I don't know. I'm trying to remember that day, but it felt like it was kind of like a Brian thing where it was like, okay, there's some relief here. You know, we don't have to keep talking about this all the time now. Now we can move to the next thing.
Yeah, I do want to bring up the timing of it, because it was something that was we discussed, everybody has discussed for a while. I think, you know, you kind of start to talk about it a little bit before the season and the lack of crowds. Then there are little spikes like the game against Iowa State, where it was still like, it was basically 80% full, but out of the 12,000-ish that were there, probably 3,000 were Iowa State fans. And you're going, really, for Iowa State? And then you start to see some of the games, 2,800 for Minnesota, 4,700 for number 7 Purdue, and, you know, which is really a bad turnout. And this wasn't a bad team. I mean, this was a average team. And I think if it was just about the product on the floor, if fans were still going, you know, pretty strong to the arena, then I think it's one of those like, all right, maybe she says, Coach, let's emphasize some defense and go get them. We'll rally around you. But when you looked around and you saw that there wasn't, you know, the fans were not engaged, they were apathetic, they weren't turning out, they bought tickets and didn't go. I mean, only like 60% of the fans that actually had tickets actually went, and they still had the lowest average attendance since 1964. That, to me, that says a lot. It says the fans are checked out, and there are two sports where they can't be at all, and it's football and men's basketball. And so she took in all the business account to this, and that was, you know, as important as anything. And so what is if I'm sure she decided, what is the important, if the coach decides, if we decide to keep Fran, what's the value? Can we make this change? Can he do something different? Well, he could have done something different for years. You know, he could have reached out to fans and done all this stuff. It just wasn't going to happen. So she obviously had to play that role of, okay, if I make the move, it's going to cost X, Y, Z, and we're going to have to go forward with that. And I guess I appreciate from what she did was she didn't let him hang, didn't keep him hanging.
Right.
They lost on a Thursday, and by early Friday afternoon it was over. Gary, and we can make a lot of comparisons. Probably not healthy to do so, but I remember with Todd Licklider, and I think they lost. I can't remember if it was Thursday or Friday. I think it was Thursday.
It was Thursday, yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
and then he fired him on first thing Monday morning. So you had like 3 days.
4 days. Jeez,
yeah.
Jeez.
So you're kind of twisting in the wind. They had a 9 a.m. meeting in Gary's office, and 8 minutes later, he walked out. I know because I was there. I saw him, and that. So anyway, but that was a long time, I thought.
Yeah.
And in today's world, I think it's an ultra long time to wait,
right?
Because you're talking about now that would have been after Selection Sunday. He would have been able, if she would have gone in the same time frame as Gary, then that would have meant they would have had to turn down the crown or accept the crown and then not go. That would have been really messy. So she handled it as quickly as possible, I thought. And obviously the McCaffery family is not happy about this and probably never will be. I mean, they will never probably accept it. Mm-hmm. But I also think that when you give her a grade for how she performed. Again, I'm going to give her a high grade. I think she handled it really well. Now we can look back retroactively if Ben McCollum doesn't work out, and everybody can. And there's going to be times in this year when you or me, well, not us necessarily, but other people are going to say, "Oh, should kept Fran," and
someone will say it.
Yeah, and but it's a long-term play as much as it is a short-term play, because who knows how much longer Fran would have been there. I mean, it seemed year to year at this point anyway.
He will turn 66 in a few days. So,
yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of factors involved. And I think that when you bring up Gary, one of many solutions for the Fran thing, and we kicked this around a little bit on our show too, would have been, hey, just go hire a defensive coach once and for all, and see, I'm going to mandate you to hire a defensive coach or something kind of like a drive for 325 situation. Okay.
Yeah.
Here's your ultimatum. And she didn't do anything like that, like a little middle ground type thing. She just made the strong decision and moved on and took care of it. So again, I'm with you, and I'm not going to say like Fran's ever going to appreciate what happened here, but number one, he's getting $4.2 million from the University of Iowa. Now he's the highest paid, effectively, the highest paid coach in Ivy League history, essentially. At Penn, he gets to go to his alma mater and coach ball, and not worry that much about NIL. He's getting plenty of money, and he's getting, $1.5 million-ish over the next 3 years, or however they're going to pay it out. I mean, plus whatever he's getting at Penn, I don't know what that is, but it's probably it's private, so who knows?
Yeah.
Probably
Is it private? Is University of Pennsylvania?
I always assumed Ivy Leagues are, but maybe not. Maybe I guess University of Pennsylvania probably isn't. But
I'm gonna have to
look that up, Aiden. Anyway, speaking of best moves, Game Day Men's Health is always your best move. Aiden says Penn is private. See, I was right, Scott. How about that? A rarity. Game Day Men's Health. It's been such a good move for me. It's almost been a year now since we've partnered with them on Legends and Listeners, and they have been an absolutely incredible sponsor in terms of impact on our lives, impact on our listeners' lives, and just support of this show so we can do this every week. So Game Day Men's Health with their testosterone replacement therapy just gets you in a great headspace, great physical space. I just ran 4 miles yesterday, and it was under 7-minute pace, and that's pretty good for age 51. So keeps your performance strong on and off the field. Get connected with Game Day Men's Health with a private, no obligation, free consultation. You can do so at GameDayMen'sHealth.com or stop by one of the locations in Ankeny, West Des Moines, or North Liberty, Scott. So always a good move, most impactful move, you could say, in your life, just like we just talked about. Mm-hmm. Now we can get into best handled move, and we've said these have been good, well-handled moves, Scott, but I think there's one move that was probably handled even better, could we say? And that was the retirement of Lisa Bluder. Obviously, that part was not her decision, but the transition to Jan Jensen was all her. I mean, the way that they kept that information at such a premium that it did not leak out, they kept their entire roster together, including Lucy Olson, including the 5 freshmen, kept Raina Harmon, kept Abby Stamp. You're losing Lisa Bluder and Janie Fitzgerald at the same time, too. Mm-hmm. And you're losing Jan Jensen. I've made that point many times. Jan Jensen lost herself. Mm-hmm. So you really, to hold everything together, because Jensen was the recruiting core. I mean, to hold everything together like she did, it went out. Bluder went out at like 3 o'clock on whatever day of the week that was. And then Jensen was announced a half hour later. To me, I thought that was, whether you agree that Jensen was the right choice, I feel like in the way that it was handled, such a major thing coming off the heels of Caitlin Clark, 2 straight NCAA title games, to keep the mojo going of the Iowa women's basketball program. I think that it was the best handled move, because you didn't open it up to. I mean, if you do a 3-4 week search, who knows where your players are going? Who knows who you actually get? Maybe you land on Jensen eventually anyway. I don't know. Your thoughts on all that?
Right. This one had the potential to be a major challenge. And if it wasn't for Jan Jensen being Jan Jensen, then we view it a little bit differently, because, a couple of things. Iowa's coming off its second consecutive national runner-up position. It is a brand. As we know, the people that attend these games, it's off the charts. Iowa is a premium gig. So she had the opportunity when Lisa came to her to say, okay, well, we're going to open this up. And if you get Jenny Baranczyk or somebody like that, that's not a bad move either. And if, but having, and I'm not saying, like, let's say you remove Jan from the equation. If your choice was Abby Stamp, who I think could still be a very good head coach, and maybe even at Iowa someday. I don't know. I mean, I think she's in that same ballpark, but you probably do go outside in that situation just for where you are. But having Jan is, I think gave her that opportunity. And she said, she had some sleepless nights trying to figure this out and navigating this. And because, again, you owe it to the program to hire the best possible coach for Iowa. And having Jan there made perfect sense. Now, where I think the timing, and this is probably, we can look back in 5 years and say, and they shouldn't have done it that way, or they should have opened it up. We can all talk about that. But the hiring itself was very strategic. And again, we're giving her a lot of flowers here, and sometimes it makes me go, when you get too good. But it was damn near brilliant by all 3 of them, because it happened during a dead week where they couldn't talk to people. And then that would lead everybody for intense speculation, recruits and signees. And you'd have this, and then of course there's going to be tampering. And then you could really get, crazy if they decided, like on that Thursday, beforehand, that Lisa announces a retirement, and then you go through this process. Instead, whether they were able to convince Lisa to wait for the announcement, they cleared everything with Jan, and then they all worked the phones. They gave Lisa the winningest coach in Big Ten women's basketball history. I think she ranks third or fourth, all-time wins for basketball, behind Bob Knight, Tom Izzo, and she's either right there with Gene Katie or right above Gene Katie. You gave her, it was a short window, but you still gave her the prominence of she's retiring. Then would everybody start going, oh man, and then it's the bleep situation. Who are you going to hire next? Filled that gap instantly. And then that in turn allowed them to call all their players, work the phones, seamless. Everybody stayed. Didn't have one detractor, because at that point the portal is open. It's a wide gate
for 30 days.
They've got great players.
Yeah.
You don't think somebody wouldn't want Hannah Stolke? You know, a sharpshooter like Taylor McCabe, you know, Lucy Olson reopens. Instead,
any of the freshmen. I mean, any of
the freshmen could have been, you know.
And they had to keep Addie Deal too, because she was already committed.
Yeah.
So, you know,
exactly.
that was a little, you know, that was a different situation, but they kept her.
Yeah, you know? They kept her. They had no detractions. And really, they've only had, in the last 3 years, they've had 2 players hit the portal anyway. But and Jan's real instrumental with that. But I think this is, again, couldn't have handled that situation differently. We will look back at some point and say whether or not Jan Jensen was the right move or not. And at this point, I would say she is the right move. You know, we'll know bigger picture later. That's not what I'm discussing here. I think it's the process. The process was flawless.
Yeah, it's remarkable that in this day and age that stuff didn't leak out. But from everything I was kind of, you know, if I'm remembering it correctly, like they really didn't let this out with anybody until that morning, pretty much. Like anybody, you know, and so it was just held. I think she said 5 people maybe knew for a long time. That's a hard secret to keep.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Because that's pretty big, like really big news.
Yeah.
And so they, you know, to be able to contain that information and keep it away from us, or you know what I mean? Like I'm not, you know, obviously we want to have it, but they did a good job. Because once stuff leaks, then there's speculation, and if they didn't have all their ducks in a row, you can't announce anything, and you know, then there is a public relations side to this whole thing, and so to make that seamless, I thought was pretty impressive by her, and that was, you know, the Brian thing was one thing, but this was in sequential order. This was the next big move for Beth Goetz. Now let's just, I don't have any more categories, so we'll just circle back to other stuff now. Let's talk about another hiring. How about Ben McCollum? How do you feel like that was handled? Because there was some, I mean, if you look in hindsight, it went pretty quick, honestly, but at the time it felt like, what is she doing? You know what I mean? Like people were very much up in arms about, you know, losing Darian DeVries, and you know, does she have enough money? Is she going to close the deal? Can she? Why is she doing it herself? What were your thoughts on how that process? We got to criticize her here at some point, right, Scott?
Yeah, I think she took a different route to hire the men's basketball coach than it's ever happened at Iowa. It's always been by committee, sometimes to a fault. I would say, you know, they ended up with the right candidate in late 1998 when they got Kirk Ferentz, but you know, the committee approach cost them Bob Stoops, you know, and so, but then you could also say it also prevented them from hiring Terry Allen. So, you know, because if it wasn't for a committee, they might have hired him. So I think you look at going out on her own. It was, you know, when you have a coaching search of that magnitude, the hours and minutes become magnified. It almost feels like a week is a month. And so the rumors, and you had immediately the Darren DeVries situation, which felt like, okay, this is going to happen. And people were reported that it was going to happen. And then obviously it wasn't. And then it comes into fruition that they had that he had plans with Indiana probably in the works. So then you take, okay, who was the next best candidate? We all talked about, you know, even on this podcast, Darren DeVries and Ben McCollum, or kind of 1, 2, you know, depending on your order.
Right.
She went on to the one that made the most sense. And we didn't know how much it made sense until after his press conference, frankly, that he was that much of an Iowa fan and growing up and how natural this is. But knowing that there were other schools that were very interested, the way she slow played it, she had to. They were in the tournament. Right. He finished up on a Saturday night and he signed the paper at 6:30 in the morning on Monday, you know, and it, you know, the whole, you know, process wasn't really going, you know, they weren't in the process of closing the deal till late Sunday afternoon. You know, they weren't doing it in the morning that day. It took time. And he came to Iowa City, toured, they looked around, and I mean, it was an all-night situation before they finally finalized it. But I looked at it this way, Chad, that what if they wouldn't have hired Ben McCollum and he would have went somewhere else?
Right.
He would have went to Xavier.
Right.
And even if you get Nico Medved, who I think is a really good coach and went to Minnesota, or somebody like that, that would have been a demerit for her. Mm-hmm. She went out and got the best coach for Iowa. And, again, we can question whether going at it alone was the right path or not, but you can't question the decision that she made at this point.
And then the contract that she handed out has also come out since, and I think it was just this last week, actually.
Yeah.
And I feel like it was she kind of did a pretty good job on that too. She's actually paying him less than, like, I'm surprised, less than McCaffery would have made this year. He's going to make $3.35 million in year one. McCaffery would have made $3.5 this year. It's a 6-year, $22.75 million contract that runs through 2031. To me, it looks like a really solid contract. Didn't have to whatever she didn't have to like crazy overpay. I think it's sort of in line with maybe what you would expect for whoever you hired as coach. I mean, I don't know if DeVries, for example, was making like 2.8 at West Virginia. So that's probably what did he end up making at Indiana? More than like quite a bit.
Oh yeah. It was $5 million.
So yeah, I mean, you got and from kind of what we heard was that maybe McCollum was her first choice all along. That was kind of like the feedback we got from one of those early donor meetings, that maybe she was leaning towards McCollum. And then I think, they obviously looked into DeVries, didn't happen. And then she gets, I don't know. She probably would say like, yeah, that was my first choice, but I think it might've been her first choice all along. So we'll see how the hire itself plays out. But I feel like, she came away with one of the two names that would have got people excited. And so that's a success, because that part of this whole deal was hiring someone that's going to get the fan base energized. And we've seen that take place now, Scott, over the last however long it's been now. What's it been? 6 weeks now? It's been around there. And, he seems like it's, things are coming together there. So, no real qualms about how it was handled. And I feel like a lot of the stuff about why is she dragging her feet, I feel like that's kind of gone away, so I don't know. I feel, hate to say it, but I feel good about it right now. I want to find something to criticize here. Like we're going to have to, I guess. We can't be, but go ahead.
Yeah. I would say with regards to the complaining about the dragging her feet, he's not going to accept the job while he's still coaching his team in the tournament. No coach is ever going to. Now, maybe behind the scenes, that you've reached an agreement or something like that. Right. But you're not going to tell the world, this is our guy. You're just not. It's not going to happen. So, he finished at like 9 o'clock, 8:30 on a Saturday night our time. So wind the clock up. It's basically 34 hours later, he's signing the contract and everything. So I think that's there's no, it's frustrating from the Iowa point of view of, why is this taking a long time? But from the realistic point of view, you got to wait till the end. Now, if she would have waited, let's say, you got done on the Saturday and it would have been Thursday or Friday of that week, then you got ample room to criticize. But, being in the process of finalizing the agreement in that Sunday night, and then having it signed on Monday morning is something that I think was right on. I mean, she had to give him the schedule. I mean, he owed it to Drake to have a meeting with Drake. And
it sounded like they made him a great offer.
Yeah,
on Sunday afternoon. So
they had a chance to be and they still do. They have a chance to be the Creighton of the Valley.
Right.
They kind of have been, under DeVries and him.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I think in hindsight, as we look back on this, I think Beth Goetz it couldn't have worked out better in terms of how Drake's NCAA tournament run panned out because, if you look back at it, and you have to have a little luck as athletic director too. So I think this will be our criticism. She got lucky here and a little bit in terms of the public perception of McCollum. It just shot through the roof once Drake beat Missouri and people saw, oh, this guy can coach, I know Tony Perkins on Drake, and this guy's outplaying Tony Perkins by a mile. This Bennett Sturt kid. And wow, they're fun to watch. And wow, that's efficient. They play defense and, they win a close game. They won in the tournament. They beat a Power 5 team in the tournament, which Fran never did at Iowa. And then at the same time, it worked out well that they lost the next game. Yeah. I mean, if they had won that game, then who knows where this thing goes. Maybe McCollum gets really widespread national interest where it's like big bucks that you can't turn down type of deal. And then you're Iowa, what do? You wait because you think you got McCollum, but and then what if you don't get him? Do you have to? You got to put other dominoes in play. Other guys in place. And so, I think in that sense, it could not have worked out better for Iowa in terms of if you wanted McCollum, and created the energy that it has. And I think there's no question that it has created a lot of positive energy, Scott. Now there's been a couple. Go ahead. Anything more on that before we move to some of the other little things? Yeah,
just one last thing is he has done and everything right since he's come to Iowa. Obviously it'll change if they lose Iowa State or something like that. But and there will be criticism later on. But I think right now he's invigorated the fan base. He's done everything he's been asked to do, and I think at this point he's really. And that's what she wanted. She's the boss. She hired him. All those conversations came out. He said the right things. Well, whether she knew it or not, well, eventually she did, but how much of a fan he was of Iowa sports and Iowa basketball, it's come out. And I think that has brought people together in a way that, Fran did a really good job, I think, of solidifying the Iowa basketball family, per se. Some of the former players and the people who really care about basketball, but he's done a good job of casting a wide net and bringing people in already, and the players he's brought in. So I can't be critical at all of this move, the timing of it. I kind of laughed when I saw when he came off the plane with her and she met him or whatever there, and all of a sudden just kind of slides on the shades, and I'm like, okay, that's a boss move, and she deserves that, at that point.
Well, it's been about exactly a year since Larissa Libby resigned as gymnastics coach. This is a little bit more of an under-the-radar situation. She was placed on administrative leave. It was on May 13th, 2024, after allegations of mistreatment within the gymnastics program. She's this was a 20-year head coach for the Iowa gymnastics team. And that was, ends up getting a settlement. Any thoughts on, that's also been part of this Beth Goetz tenure. She's got to handle this stuff too. It's not just the big coaching moves. So what do you think of that? And obviously we've got the softball situation too, that's been very recent.
Yeah, kind of lumping them together, the softball situation. She, Renee Gillespie, before the season announced she had a health issue, she couldn't coach this year, so they had an interim. And then you had a situation early on where the interim coach took offense to some players kneeling for the national anthem, and it became just a massive situation. And it had happened concurrently with basketball, men's basketballs, the search, and I think it was the search, and then also kind of when Fran was let go. So you just had this, she had to juggle with that. That's not a small situation when you've got kind of a mutiny and you've got to basically then fire the interim head coach for a softball team and then bring in somebody else to be that. And without knowing, unfortunately, our brains and our places, we can't really work on everything here. Mm-hmm. Without knowing the intricate details, I will say this, and this is not a plus or a minus, but what is, I think, impactful here when you deal with those two sports and these issues, Gary Barta did not have any equity whatsoever when it came to issues regarding women's sports or Title IX. That kind of got blown with field hockey, whether it was his fault or not. They got sued. They lost a lawsuit in 2020. They ended 4 sports. He got sued again. He had to reinstate a sport, add a women's sport. What could have happened with Larissa Libby? I don't think Gary Barta could have done whatever he wouldn't have made a right move because he couldn't. He would have been blasted one way or the other. Similarly, we saw with field hockey. That was the right move that had to happen. Everything subsequently was not the right move. Right. And I think, and that some of it was him, a lot of it was the university, some of it was the state of Iowa gave him just unbelievably piss poor advice. But then look, and they did. It was just like, how did you go to law school? Let alone pass a test there. But then you look at Beth. She does have equity in that area. She, as the former senior women's administrator and all of this, that she's not going to be accused of anything in any direction that Gary would have been. So I think that was helpful. And then, to her credit, she hired a coach from the University of Washington. That's lateral move and to go from Washington to Iowa, and they're in the same league now. I thought that was really strong. And then you look at the softball situation and what has materialized. Since they removed the interim, they've had a great year. I don't think they're going to the tournament. Maybe they are, but for what they did with all the turmoil that they've had, their head coach can't coach, and then they're on their
third coach, just like the Bears.
Right. It's like Eberflus times -2, and to be within to do what they did again, she gets to claim it, just like she gets to claim the misery when it happens. So in this case, without knowing the complete inner workings, right. I think she handled both situations really well, and probably better than Gary could have, even if Gary made all the right moves.
Yeah, that's another thing. Just kind of the fresh start at AD too. You just kind of needed, somebody that didn't have that baggage or that type of stuff with the lawsuits and everything. Yeah. So because anyway, so one thing that I think we've learned about Beth Goetz over these 2 years is that. As you bring up Barta, a couple things. Number one, Barta was kind of known for kind of a fundraising type of AD, and not necessarily, maybe the, PR type. We've just talked about that stuff, just handling stuff. And it seems like from the feedback I've gotten from very high-ranking people that she's good at both. She's good at both the relationships and on the fundraising side. And so that's also something that I think just long-term has been a real upgrade, I would say. And then another thing that as we head into the revenue sharing era, Scott, we're going to talk about kind of the future of Beth Goetz, which is she's extremely competitive. We've talked on this show, well, does she just let these sports slide or this or that? That's probably not in her personality. She's extremely competitive, and that comes from her days as a player, an athlete, a coach. She wants to win in all these things, and I think that's also part of the reason to make the men's basketball move. Let's start winning. Let's not just have a team that maybe plays its way onto the bubble. Let's get a winner. Let's see what we can do here, Mm-hmm. And that's hard to do in football, men's basketball, women's basketball, wrestling. She's very committed to. Yes. So I think that those are a couple of things I feel like we've learned a little bit more as we go. And I'm interested to see now, Scott. She's got a tough call here with how to handle, all the revenue sharing over the year in the coming years. And the one thing I'll say, and I'll turn it to you on this, is that when I interviewed her at the bowl game, I liked what she said about, we're going to take this, it's going to be different. We're going to see how year one goes, and we'll make adjustments. They might not have all the right answers right away, and I like that approach also to this.
You're right. I guess a couple of things that stand out for me going into all this is in conversations I had when she was the interim and kind of in that ballpark, she had a wide consensus of people who supported her. Coaches were all in her favor. I mean, I think back when she had her first news conference as interim, Lisa Bluder and Jan Jensen and the women's staff, they had just come back from Croatia. They got back late, like the day before, but they wanted to be there. And I remember talking to Jan, and she said, how do you tell your person that you're your person? You show up for them. And that's what they did. They wanted to support her. When you look at when she was hired, and I mean, there were probably 150 athletes that were in there for her news conference. And you see some athletes and coaches crying, and a lot of that's the historic nature of this, but it shows how invested she is. I remember being at a PCA meeting with Tom Brands. And he goes, I know I'm not the president, in Tom Brand style, I'm not the president and I don't have any decision making here, but I think we should just take the interim label off, and he said that point blank. I remember talking to Rick Heller at the crossover at Kinnick for a little while. And I just said, kind of tell me your thoughts. He goes, she is fantastic. Beth gets it. She understands what it's like to coach these sports because she was a coach. She was a coach at a small level. She's invested. She wants to be there. She goes to these events. She trusts the players. She wants everybody to feel that way because she was an athlete. She was, again, Clemson started their soccer team and she started on their very first year, and she's from St. Louis. She was a small Division II assistant coach when she started out and had to mow the grass and do all that. So it builds her up to this and then she's taken all that she's learned from UConn, from Minnesota, from Wisconsin, or what would have been Wisconsin, but all these other places, Ball State, and she had a plan in place for what was going to happen financially last summer. And she told me, she's like, she looks at it like every single day. She just plans, and, she has plans upon plans and then contingency plans. So she was well prepared for whatever comes down the pipe with what will be decided here in the next week or so at the House settlement. So you mentioned the challenges ahead financially. They're there. They're obviously there. We all expect, out of the 20.5 million, and that number is not going to be the same 5 years down the road. It might be 30.5 million. But football is going to command the biggest chunk. She understands that. And some people may have been worried that she's just going to be all about women's sports stuff. She is. She's very supportive of them, and she's going to push them really hard the way Christine Grant pushed. Christine Grant was a huge supporter, but she was effing demanding too. She made them be good. And she's going to be the same way there. But she also understands football has to win. Football has to be at the top, and so does men's basketball. So she's going to give them the resources to compete. But the challenge is going to be, Chad, the Sophie's choice. How do you divide it? And we had a side convo about this last week. Actually, I said, look at you in Wisconsin. You're competing for top 50 talent in women's basketball. Your volleyball program kind of wears an Iowa jersey. Mm-hmm. And they're the exact opposite. Volleyball in Wisconsin, because these are sister schools. I think they're the most similar schools in the Big Ten. They wear, in basketball, they're a party favor. And, in volleyball, they're a national power. Yeah. And, you can't take away resources from women's basketball just to make everything all equal. You can't just say, well, we're going to move this money to volleyball. But kind of our conversation, and it's not I'm writing, is, but they have the flexibility. And this is to your point when you talked to her at the bowl game. They have the flexibility to say, what if? Wow, they got up to 8th in the Big Ten this year in volleyball. We're going to strike while the iron's hot and then move resources there. And I'm not suggesting she's not going to put any resources in. I'm just saying that, have that flexibility in place to make sure that, hey, you got a good program. Let's boost it and win.
So all this goodwill that Beth Goetz has built up over these 2 years, Scott, could all be undone with a bad football hire. I think that's the thing that's probably looming biggest in the who knows how far ahead future. Let's say 3 years, 2 years, who knows? We don't know, but let's say it's 2 years from now that Kirk Ferentz says, okay, I'm retiring. That's when Beth Goetz will ultimately, probably, I mean, do you agree? Kind of like that's where her legacy will really be defined. What she does after the longest tenured coach in college football, the winningest coach in Big Ten history by that point. Thoughts on that?
Without a doubt. I mean, let's look at Bump Elliott. He hires Lute Olson in 73. He hires Dan Gable in 75, 76. Awesome hires. As the best hires in those sports they ever had at Iowa. If he doesn't get Hayden Fry right, he's getting fired.
Well said.
And he even said it.
Yeah.
He hires Hayden Fry and it ushers in, a golden era of Iowa athletics that to this day just kind of is like, from nostalgia, but also results. And Hayden, was the greatest game changer they ever had. That's how she's going to be remembered. Ben McCollum can take the men's basketball team to the Final Four. Tom Brands could beat Penn State a couple of times in the national tournament. Jan Jensen could go back to the Final Four. All that's great. But if she hires somebody who goes 4-8 and 5-7 in their first 2 years in football, that's how people will remember her. And there is pressure because unfortunately we haven't evolved yet in as much as a society that it's going to be pinned on her gender as much as it is anything else. That they're going to say, we can't hire women as AD. They're not going to hire the right football coach. And, that's probably a minority, but it's unfortunately a vocal minority in today's era. So I think there is some extra pressure. However, when you asked Iowa fans 4 or 5 years ago, what was your biggest fear? It's that Gary Barta is going to be the one hiring the football coach. It was, somebody's got to hire the football coach,
right?
And it's not going to be Kirk Ferentz. So I think you got to trust her. I think what we've described for this last hour has shown that she's not perfect, but she's made so many right moves in a very short period of time, impactful moves. And the way she structured the athletic department financially suggests to me that she's well positioned to make a right move. And it's just going to be a matter of, can she close the deal? Well, she closed the deal very quickly with Ben McCollum once he became And if she would have let him get away, that would have let a lot of doubt in my mind. But she made it. But this is the career defining move. No question. She could build a Taj Mahal in downtown Iowa City for basketball, and it won't matter if they don't get the right football coach in there.
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure. And actually, as you were talking, it got me to thinking that kind of getting men's basketball figured out this offseason has now just opens her up to not that you can't do both, but now she can put a little bit. I mean, that she doesn't have to necessarily have like a bunch of short lists going for men's basketball right now. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, right.
She can be, thinking about football. What's next? Really digging into that in her mind, wherever, if she's on a walk or something, you know what I mean? Yeah. It's like that can be kind of a focus. Who knows when it'll happen, but, and it's not, there's definitely not, I mean, I wouldn't say definitely not, but there's not a Jan Jensen right now on the staff. There's not like an automatic, there would be candidates on the current staff, Seth Wallace, LeVar Woods, I think Tim Lester. Probably not Phil Parker whenever that point comes, just because that's not really his. That's just not him. He's not a head coach.
No,
hate to say, but obviously, there's going to be. We'll see where Iowa football is at that point too. I mean, whenever that's another part of that. What's the national perception of Iowa football? Has Tim Lester's offense turned Iowa football into a really attractive job? We'll see where that whole thing goes. But yeah, definitely that. Wrestling, I think there's some frustrated fans in wrestling right now. And I do think she does have to, I think she has to keep an eye on wrestling as much as Tom Brands loves her. And I know she likes Tom Brands. There's no, people are getting a little tired of losing to Penn State. Now they've had a really good stretch here of recruiting. They've had a good off season, but when I lived out east, the Washington Redskins won the offseason every year too, and Nebraska Cornhuskers have won every offseason, the last 10 years too. So, you got to do it on the mat, so to speak.
Yeah.
So, anyway, so I do think wrestling's something to watch. I'm not saying he's on the hot seat or anything, but there are people that are getting come on, and you're seeing David Taylor out at Oklahoma State starting to make waves there. It's not just Iowa, Penn State now. Oklahoma State's right back in the thick of this thing. So anyway, I do think there's plenty going on here for Beth in the future, and that she's got to get right.
Yeah, for sure. And wrestling is kind of that point that you mentioned, because there is kind of a frustration now that they have their own facility, that's a one of a kind, $30+ million facility that's connected to Carver Hawkeye Arena, that they've got an opportunity to really turn it into that should be a tipping point. And you have the ability to pay wrestlers. So go ahead and now it's kind of in Tom's hands. And, like women's wrestling, I think they're just going to continue to dominate, and I don't see anything there. Now, an area that I think, there's two areas that I think, need to be bear watching. One is, can they parlay Ben McCollum's hire and potential success next year if it happens? Jan Jensen, if she can maintain, an NCAA tournament team and continue to drive interest, can that parlay itself into an overhaul at Carver Hawkeye Arena, which I think needs it at this point? And can they be attentive to fans, because the amenities there are, 25th in the Big Ten. Everybody else is 1 through 17. It's just an abysmal situation there. It's true.
Took me a minute there
yeah. Whether it's the food choices, the restrooms. And I always said, I'm like, the people who have the best seats have the farthest to go the bathroom and go to get something to eat and stuff. And why aren't you having ushers walking? But those are things she needs to identify.
That's a different podcast. That's a different Horse Latitudes podcast.
That's a whole other podcast, as we would say. The other thing, and this is my fearful thing, and I have brought this up before, is when you start to pay athletes and the money is you starting to put things in different pools, what is going to be vulnerable, and how do you approach it? And I think baseball's vulnerable. And as we know, they're battling for first place. They might take first place in the Big Ten this year, which is an absolute credit to Rick Heller, who every time this year, almost every year, we're like, wow, he must be the best coach at Iowa.
Yeah,
he's right. He's right.
That's
He's
crazy.
He's the Lisa Bluder of Iowa men's sports to me.
Yeah,
He's just really that good. But Rick's in his 60s. So what happens in 3 years? He shuts it down. What happens at that point if Iowa goes, falls apart, and no donors, no nothing, and they're already, you're $3 million in the hole with baseball anyway. Do you say, what? It's just, we'd be better served making that into a parking lot over there and shutting down baseball. That's something to be cognizant of. I'm not predicting it, but I think Iowa and other sports other than the Big Ten, because it's uber hard to compete for the NCAA tournament, as we're seeing. They could win the Big Ten regular season crown and not get in the NCAA tournament.
Right.
And so that's something that she may face, at some point. Hopefully that's not the case.
Well, and she is still just 50 years old, Beth Goetz. So, this is, ideally for her, and the university, this is a long runway ahead. So she's going to have time to make these a lot of moves on her plate in the future. Yeah. But I think all in all, this podcast sort of kind of summed up what she's done. When you just think back, everything we just discussed, and I wasn't even I wasn't thinking we were going to go 75 minutes, but it really has been a lot. There's been a lot of change going on, and she's about to oversee, the revenue sharing thing too. That's going to be such a spotlight just so much has changed in the world of college athletics under her watch. And I think Iowa really has had good leadership over these 2 years. So that's kind of where I leave this thing.
Yeah. And my last parting thought is there are all kinds of differences in leadership style that work and are effective. I think she's bordered by two of the very best in the industry who are completely different. I think Josh Whitman's as good as any athletic director in the country at Illinois. I mean, if you want a commissioner of football, I would hire him. He's that good. Mm-hmm. And I know he thinks very, very highly of Beth. And his style is different, really. He's a lawyer. He's, very strong in his ways. I think Jamie Pollard is a fantastic athletic director for Iowa State. I wrote about this week. He has taken Iowa State from being maybe the worst athletic department in the country to being maybe one of the best in the Big 12 and ushered them into a golden era. So there are different ways, and there are things you can learn from that. But in particular, those two fan bases are very proud of their athletic directors.
That's a great point. Yeah.
They bring them, they make them feel good about their program. They're rah-rah. Beth's not an overly, Josh isn't really rah-rah, but he's one of them. He graduated there. Beth's not a rah-rah, but you can feel the energy. And people respond to her because she's kind of that combination of she's warm when she needs to be, but she's strong when she needs to be. She can play the room really well. She's not necessarily some great orator, but she makes everybody connected. And I think, Jamie does an outstanding job for Iowa State's fan base of doing that, of inspiring him. And as you said,
he's what they need. He's what they need. Yep.
Gary, I like Gary. I'm not going to say anything negative about him. I worked well with him.
Yeah,
for a long, long time.
Yep.
In some ways, he didn't really inspire the fan base that much. And I think Beth has the opportunity to do that, but not do that where she's in the forefront. Jamie is in the forefront. But that's okay, because that's what works for Iowa State, and that's what works for him. She operates a little more in the background, but then she comes to the forefront when she needs to. I think she's off to a tremendous start. She was the right hire. And I think ultimately, she's on a really good path for Iowa. I think she's ushering Iowa into the new era because she's progressive in her thoughts when it came, and was years ago when it came to revenue sharing. Gary was very reluctant in that area. He was very conservative. She's at the forefront of it, and I think Iowa will be better served for the next 20 years, even when she's done as athletic director.
Great show, man. That was a good conversation. We've had two beauties in a row, I feel like, with the football schedules, and now this one. I think we're on a roll. Yeah. We'll find out if the Iowa baseball, the next time we talk to you, we'll know if the Iowa baseball team has won a Big Ten regular season championship. They're trying to do that for the first time since 1990. The Horse Latitudes era of the podcast will continue next week on Legends and Listeners. Thanks for joining us. Scott Dochterman, Chad Leistikow. Talk to you next week on Iowa Everywhere.